As I have tried to quit on my own and with professional help. Neither was successful as far as staying abstinent from drug use or abusing drugs, as far as staying clean yearly, whatever. I eventually found my way back. My first introduction to drugs was through uh, two types. It was family and friends. How I was introduced to drugs, and I was approximately 14 years of age. I would have made some better choices and decisions, and I do see myself being further in life as far as accomplishments than I do. There's a lot of things I would have done different, and I can be further in life financially, uh, uh, physically, health-wise too, if I didn't use drugs.
Not really. I think it's a business, and just like any other business, the target is whoever has the money to buy it. So, I mean, I think the drugs are put in places where they know people will buy it. If there are no drugs users in a specific area, they're not going to put it there because they want to sell it. So whether it's black people, white people, Hispanic people, whatever, they put it where they know that they're going to sell it. I mean, it might seem like drugs are targeted to all black people because that's where we live. We live in a predominantly black neighborhood or predominantly black city. So it might seem like, oh, they're just putting the drugs in the black neighborhood, but that's where we live, so that's what we know, and that's what we see. But if we were to go to a predominantly white area, then it would be the same thing. I think that it's out of control, and it's been out of control for a while. And I think it's getting more out of control now with all of the recent murders and drug busts that happened. I think the only real solution to lower the percentage of drug-related crimes is to lower the amount of drugs in a given area. And how do you do that? I think it all has to do with border control. If the drugs can't get in, then they can't get to the neighborhoods. If they can't get to the neighborhoods, then we eventually see a reduction in crime. Now, I think the crime would spike before it reduces, but I think it inevitably will reduce because the drugs aren't coming in. When I say it will spike, it would be because if I have drugs over here and you don't have any drugs, then you're going to come over here to try to get my drugs, and that could cause a spike in crime. But once they all dry out, or once they're all gone or used up, then the crime rate or the crime percentage would eventually reduce. But I think that the only way to stop it or the only way to reduce it is to reduce the prevalence of drugs in the community. And that plays into, or what plays into that is controlling what comes in our borders. I think it's affected my life personally and professionally. Personally, because I've had a number of family members who were drug users and drug abusers, and they, whatever goes along with that, and it's different in every case. With my aunt, who was a drug abuser, like, we didn't know it, but she was alienated from the family, and she couldn't come to stuff like Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner. So that affects your life to a certain extent. And then I have an uncle who was IV drug user, and he contracted HIV and he passed away. And so it has affected my life personally and professionally. I deal with it every day. I teach students who use drugs and abuse drugs, and I have students whose families use and abuse drugs. So it affects, you know, what I do on a daily basis. Not so much personally anymore, and that's a good thing. But professionally, I see it every day. Students who use drugs and their parents who also use and abuse drugs, unfortunately. So I would be one of the ones say that drugs affects the black community the most because I know the black community, that's where I'm from, and that's what I know. But if I were a member of the Hispanic community and lived in a Hispanic neighborhood, I would argue that drugs affect the Hispanic community the most. So I don't know if it's a question of which cultures are most affected. I don't think anybody can really answer that question. I'm not like a drug statistician who does studies on drugs in neighborhoods. I just know what happens in my community, and like I said, if you go out to the Midwest where there are predominantly Caucasian people, then we would say that drugs affect Caucasian people the most, but that might not necessarily be true. So, you know, it just depends on where you are, what you see. Like people who say it's too much crime in Baltimore, and that's because when we turn on the news gives us the news from Baltimore, and so maybe some crime did happen. We won't turn on the news and see what's going on in Atlanta. We turn on the news and see what's going on in Baltimore. So, you know, I want to move to Miami. I want to move to. But when you get down there and you turn on the news, it's going to give you the news that happened in those areas. So, you know, it seems like it's a lot going on in the city. It seems like drugs are a major problem, but it's because that's what we see. And, you know, that plays into the media and how they, you know, deliver their messages and their stories. But that's a whole nother video project that we won't get into. But I don't know which culture drugs affect the most because, again, I don't have experience or an extensive enough experience with other cultures.